passing of Proposition 19, what do you think is the possible action the federal government will take? Because that's obviously against federal law.
Good for you. There is absolutely no question. But if I were standing right here in California or anywhere else in the country, holding one marijuana cigarette now, half a cigarette, a seed, that is a direct violation of federal law. No question about it. And yes, federal law trumps state laws, supremacy clause, and all of the rest of that. But it is absolutely clear that the state of Missouri, the state of California, is entitled to repeal. They can pass whatever laws they want to, and they can repeal whatever laws they want to. They can't repeal federal law, but they can decline to enforce it. So they could say, you know, feds, this is no longer a violation of law in California. We're not going to enforce federal law. If you want, feel free. Now, I was a former federal prosecutor, and I'm here to tell you it's an open secret that the federal government does not have the ability of prosecuting volumes of cases. They are set to prosecute higher level. I mean, even when I was in the U.S. Attorney's Office from 1975 through 78, we had minimum prosecutions. We wouldn't prosecute anything less than a ton of marijuana, and that was back in the 70s. I don't know what the deal is now. They don't have the ability to do volume. And I'm convinced, personally, by the way, one of the major planks, one of the major foundations of our government is the concept of federalism, which, by the way, is my recommended option in this whole thing. Federalism sounds like egghead talk, but it's not. It means that let the smallest form of government in our country that is able to address a particular area do it. I don't think anyone would disagree with the fact that the federal government does not have all the answers, okay? So let's allow each state to decide how best to serve and protect its people. What would happen if that were the case? By the way, that's what we did when we finally repealed alcohol prohibition. We did not say that Missouri or Pennsylvania or Georgia will now serve alcohol. No, we didn't say that at all. All we said is that the federal government's going to back out of it and allow each state to decide how best to serve its people, and the federal involvement was simply restricted to assisting each state in enforcing its chosen laws. And so, by the way, as a practical matter, President Obama is up for re-election in 2 years, yes? I can't believe that he is going to thumb his nose at the voters of California and say, boy, I know better than you are, I'm going to overturn what you did. I'm convinced that he's going to do exactly the same thing that he did with Proposition 215, which is medical marijuana, and Attorney General Holder issued a memorandum to all United States Attorney's offices saying that if you have medical marijuana legislation and if people are in compliance with state and local law, we're going to leave them alone. That's what it now is the status in the federal government and medical marijuana states, and I'm convinced it's going to be the same thing with regard to Proposition 19. I could be wrong, and there's a risk. But, for heaven's sake, can't we stand up and say, feds, back out of this. This is our business. Leave us alone. And of course, I'm a libertarian, but I believe that strongly. What's the matter with us? Why can't we, in fact, stand up and say, we're adults, we can take care of ourselves, get out of here? That's going to be the vote. It's going to be an important election. Other questions? Oh, there must be. Yes?
I wonder if there's a concern of border states.
The cameraman is pointing the camera at himself while he's asking this question. It's going to be a good question. I can just feel it.
You think border states of California would step up in prosecuting tourist trafficking, and also when it's passed, how quickly it'll take effect and how quickly other states will follow the policy?
I certainly believe in prosecuting anybody that violates the law. Honestly, you know, if you have a so-called medical marijuana dispensary under California law and you're not following the law, I think they should be prosecuted by the state, not by the feds. What's going to happen when Proposition 19 passes? It will take effect the next day. There's a caveat on that, or an exception. Yes, people in California then, as adults, could grow their own marijuana starting on November 3rd if it passes in a 5-foot by 5-foot area, and they could possess the marijuana. That have to be pretty fast growing, but as soon as it's grown, they could possess that up to an ounce. And they could even give it to their friends as long as they don't sell it. And that would all be not illegal under California law by the next day. But the beauty of Prop 19 is that it allows each city, talk about the concept of federalism, it's the same thing, but now each city can decide how to respond. And so it will not take effect in the city of Pasadena or Burbank or San Diego or whatever unless that city opts in. An affirmative vote to say, yes, we are going to allow this to take place in our city. They will set up the rules, the procedures for growing it, for selling it, and the rest of that, and one city can learn from another. So it certainly would take some time before that were to occur. I think it will be successful. I think that the cities that decide not to do it will probably say, well, wait a minute, it's happening anyway. And by the way, if the city of Burbank, for example, allowed this to take place, and I lived in the city of Pasadena, which did not allow it, I could still drive as an adult to Burbank, I could buy up to an ounce, and then I could go back to my home in Pasadena, and I still could use it legally. But I think that, let each city decide how best to do it. And one way or the other, we'll learn from each other, and the system will work. I think that's what's going to happen. Yes, sir.
What about all the people that are the nonviolent crime, nonviolent marijuana users that already are in prison? And say Proposition 19 gets passed. What about the people that are already in prison?
Proposition 19 is absolutely silent with regard to anybody that is now in jail or prison or had a prior conviction or otherwise. It will not affect them whatsoever. If I were king of California, and King James has kind of a ring to it, there's even some precedents, but there doesn't seem to be much of a movement, but I'm still waiting. But I would, if I were the governor, actually impanel a commission to look into all of these sentences with regard certainly to marijuana and probably other drug laws as well. If people are out there selling marijuana to make a profit, I'd let them stay in prison, honestly. Anybody that's going to intentionally sell something that's illegal to make money is violating the law, and I don't have much sympathy for them. If they happen to be cocaine-addicted people and were selling cocaine in order to support their habits, I would get them into drug treatment as soon as I could and get them out of prison. And by the way, too, some of these mandatory minimum laws, or some of these the sentences are egregious. So I'd look at each one, and if somebody was, selling marijuana and stuff, and they got 25 years in prison, and they'd already served 7, I'd probably release them. That's all up to me. In direct answer to your question, Propositions 19 is silent about that. There's going to be a movement, though, because it's just too expensive and just too inhumane to keep all these people in prison. I think that we're going to see that, but not from Prop 19. Yes, in the back.
Okay, I'm originally from Anaheim Hills, so...
You've gotten over it pretty well.
But I'm just saying, I was wondering, because, there's always an influx in California of the snowbirds. So do you think once the proposition is passed, there'll be an influx of people just moving there because
Sure.
and that might skew the results of the taxes and the money situation?
I'm going to answer your question this way. Holland has a big problem, and I don't know what to do about it, and they don't either. Holland is a pretty small country, and they have a lot of what they call drug tourists that come in order to use drugs in Holland and have a good time and all the rest. And they come in from Germany or from France or the United States or whatever. I don't have any suggestion except to say that California is so much larger that we just really wouldn't have the problem. I would certainly not recommend that the city of Anaheim or Anaheim Hills or Irvine on their own do this, because yes, they become, you probably know what Haight-Ashbury is in San Francisco or whatever. Yeah, it'd just be overrun. But if other cities do it too, it's just not going to be that much of a problem. And honestly, in a lot of ways, I don't think that the city of Anaheim Hills would be that upset if lots of people came in from Kentucky or Missouri or whatever and spent their money there, stayed in a hotel, paid their sales taxes. There'll probably be a surtax on it as well. Think of the money they'll get. So I really just don't see that particularly as a problem. I certainly don't anticipate that people would flood in from Mexico to California to use marijuana. Somehow I just don't envision that happening. So these are just unrealistic problems, yes.
Yeah. This gentleman asked about other states being opportunistic on California surrounding states taking advantage of...
You mean people from Arizona or Nevada or something would come into California? It's kind of like the question that was just asked. I just don't see that as so much being a problem. honestly, what would probably happen is that Nevada would look and see what California's doing. They're getting tax revenue from our people in Nevada, and then they're coming back and everything. By the way, I'm sure that there's plenty of marijuana in Nevada, I mean, how many of you, come on, I'm turning off my cameras, point the camera this way. You know, if I were to give each one of you in this room $50 right now, how many of you could come back by noon tomorrow with $50 worth of marijuana if you wanted to?
In Missouri in 1860s.
You know, I mean, it's here, for heaven's sake. It'd be here in Nevada. It would be, so I just don't see that as a problem. Am I answering your question? Kind of?
Yeah, I have another question about the business
Okay.
protocol and how scary and dangerous and really corrupt it is, and that people, well, they'll be ready with a business protocol that's feasible.
Sure. There are some companies, actually I've heard from Oakland, because Oakland is really well organized with regard to medical marijuana. And they're doing it right, and they're making some money on it. By the way, the city of Los Angeles, you probably heard, again, they ignored the problem for a long time, and then finally, flexed its muscles and closed down 100 so-called medical marijuana dispensaries. It did not result in less marijuana being sold in Los Angeles. It just pushed it underground, and they didn't get any tax revenue or anything from that. So, I mean, those are all problems. Will any city be ready on November 3rd to have issued their proclamations and their procedures? Probably not. Maybe Oregon, maybe Oakland. Some companies are actually lined up, knocking on the doors in Oakland saying, if this passes, we would like to supply the marijuana to you, and we'll do it on low bid contract or something like that. So I don't know, maybe they are. Give them a week, give them a month, give them a year. I mean, however long they feel comfortable, then they can opt in and say, okay, now we're ready. That's fine. That answer your question?
I can give you a better answer.
More or less, okay, give her a better answer.
Arizona will be voting on the medical use of marijuana on November 2nd.
They already have medical marijuana.
Not to the degree they're going to be voting on it.
They're having to get it.
Yeah, I mean,
Okay.
the race is not as popular in the press, there's not as much big deal about it, but they've already held workshops in every county. They already have it set up for where it will be grown, who will be selling it.
Sure.
They've already got everything set up, and they don't even know if it's going to pass.
Sure.
But they know if it does, the money's going to be there, and they need to be on the ball.
They're very likely. Lots of cities or lots of people in California, I'm just not familiar with it. But if and when this passes, I fully expect that they'll be lining up. There's going to be a lot of money in this. And the money is now going to the Mexican drug cartels, for heaven's sake. Let's have it go to the cities and use for paying firefighters. Yes?
Yeah, I've lived in Kentucky for some time, and I think you have to look at that model. They have 90 dry counties. You got to drive 70 miles to buy beer, but you can only bring back so much. You'll be bootlegging. The bootleggers actually do cards. They don't serve underage.
Okay.
Because they don't want their county to go wet. They want
Sure.
to stay dry. I think it's the same thing you're going to see with this type of prohibition still occurring in pockets of California.
Sure. It'll
The
work
problem
out.
that I see, though, is you've got these gung-ho sheriffs that say, I don't care what this law is, I've got to enforce federal law, and they're not wanting to go by the laws California's already passed.
That issue has distressed me no end. That there are lots of people in California that in law enforcement or whatever else that do not agree with Proposition 215. Now, I, as a judge, when I swore to do my job, that means I will uphold the laws. And that means I have upheld laws I did not agree with. It is still a violation of law in California to possess or use a hypodermic needle and syringe without a medical doctor's prescription. And a medical doctor is prohibited from prescribing hypodermic needles and syringe to people that are drug addicted. Only for, insulin if you have diabetes, things like that. That's a stupid law. I've already explained my reasons. I enforce it anyway. And it's been pretty disappointing that a lot of chiefs of police or board of supervisors or whatever, they don't agree with Prop 215, so they don't enforce it. Shame on them. And I understand, but that's human nature. You can just do the best you can. Yes?
I have kind of more of a political question about Prop 19. Some of the bigger drug policy organizations at first, weren't going to back Richard Lee about the 2010 initiative, saying it's the wrong time to wait for 2012 when there was a bigger youth turnout for an election. Now we're seeing the polls, steady